Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight, our feature is one of my favorite actors, William Schallert, one of the great second bananas in television history who died recently at the age of 93. He may have been in more television shows than anybody else in history, and he was in so many shows we can't keep track of them all, and I can only cover my favorites. He was the son of Edwin Schallert, the longtime drama critic for the Los Angeles Times, which helped him get into the business, and one of his first gigs was a stage performance where he was directed by Charlie Chaplin. But enough of that. We're going to discuss his best performances on television and his discussion of them, which is fascinating. And we're going to start with my favorite. He was Mr. Leander Pomfret, named after the French fry, one of Dobie Gillis's teachers in The Men He Loves at Dobie Gillis.
You, Mr. Gillis, are taking economics?
You, Mr. Pomfret, are teaching economics?
I asked you first. What is an unlikely type like you doing in an economics class? And oh, what a foolish question. Who is she?
Her name's Daphne Winsett.
Now, that accounts for you, Mr. Gillis. What about you, Mr. Krebs? What are you doing here?
I'm with Dobe.
That's your only reason.
Right. Oh, and a word of warning to you, sir.
What's that?
If you try to throw me out, I cry.
By all means, stay.
Okay, Mr. Pomfret, it's your turn. What are you doing in economics?
Yeah, Mr. Pomfret. I mean, you teach history and poetry and biology and all that jazz. What do you know about economics?
Very little, as I am about to demonstrate. However, the dean told me this morning to teach economics, and one does not argue with the dean.
Oh, I'm sure you'll be very good at it.
I'm not.
Nor am I. However, let us be of good heart. Please take your seats, and together we will venture into the unexplored jungle of money and banking.
His name was Pomfret, Mr. Pomfret. Leander Pomfret. Oh, I loved doing that. That was Max Schulman wrote the first year that I was on it, and his stuff was just impeccable, you know. He was one of my heroes anyway, because I used to try to write college humor when I was at UCLA. A friend of mine and I used to write for the men's page, which was supposed to be the place where the campus wits put things down, supposedly campus wits anyway. And I knew the style, but he did it in Barefoot Boy with Chic. He did it perfectly. And I thought, well, there's a professional. Working for Max Schulman was a joy because I knew that he knew how to do what I thought I could do, but I couldn't begin to do it the way he did it. He was really great at that stuff. He wrote very well for Pomfret.
Many people know William Schallert best for his role as Nils Barris in the legendary episode of Star Trek, Trouble with Tribbles.
They seem to be gorged.
Gorged? On my grain? Kirk, I am going to hold you responsible. There must be thousands of them.
Hundreds of thousands. 1,771,561. That's assuming one tribble, multiplying with an average litter of 10, producing a new generation every 12 hours over a period of 3 days.
And that's assuming that they got here 3 days ago.
Just called Trouble with Tribbles. It was just a job. I didn't attach any importance to it at all. And it was like 3 days' work. And I didn't watch the show. I used to be quite a fan, a real aficionado of science fiction. But I didn't think that show was serious about science fiction, so I really wasn't interested in it. So I never watched it. So I didn't know anything about it, and I went on the show. I knew the guy who played the trader, the fat guy. He and I had done some comedy bits together. But I remember working on the show, and it was just 3 days' work, that's all. Then I got invited to something called Econquan. I still don't know what that means, but it was at a hotel down at the airport. And I walked into this main lobby, and it was filled with people who were dressed up like aliens. It was kind of like going someplace and seeing all of the Saturday Night Live, like the bees with the antennae, bouncing back and forth and all of that. And so that was everybody there was dressed somewhat like that, and they were all saying Nils Barris. And I'm looking around, and they said, "No, that's you." I said, "What?" They said, "That's your name, Nils Barris, on Trouble with Tribbles." I said, "Oh, I didn't know that." So from then on, I knew what my name was on that show. But otherwise, how can you remember your name on shows when you're only on them for 2 or 3 days? It's been years now. And that was either the number one or the number two popular show of Star Trek. The other one was a rather serious show, something at the city at the end of the world, something like that. But this one was apparently very popular with fans. They loved the Tribbles. So I had a lot of fun doing it. And when I saw it, I realized why I liked it. I got to chew Bill Shatner out on a regular basis in that show.
Well, without question, his most famous role was as Patty Duke's father, Martin Lane, in the Patty Duke Show. We did Patty Duke's podcast just a couple of weeks back, so we mentioned him. One of the 60s great television fathers.
And which one of you two is helping him to learn?
I am.
Oh?
Oh, don't look at me. I'm just the referee.
I'll have to meet this boy. I didn't think the two of you were attracted to the same type.
A dreamboat is a dreamboat in any language.
Well, if he has a financial problem, I might be able to get him a job on the paper after school.
Could you, Uncle Martin? We'd appreciate that. Who's we? Calimere and I.
I'll check and see if we have an opening for a copy boy.
First of all, I was a nice father, a nice dad, and I was working with Patty Duke. And even though the premise of the show was a little silly and it didn't stay on as long as it might have otherwise, she was somebody to be reckoned with. And I think the writing was pretty good on the show. So I did my jokes, and when they were written well, I did them well, I think. You know, my personality was okay. I was a dad, and I was warm-hearted.
I want to spend a little time hearing him talk about what a talent Patty Duke was and the zeitgeist of that show in the 1960s.
It was a silly premise, but that's something they dreamed up. Patty and her manager, I think it was her manager, dreamed it up so that she could be really shown to play the two girls and make them different, and she did. I used to think of her as two different people when I was working with her. She was amazing. She was really a good actress. At this point, we started the show in 1963 in New York. In February, she'd won the Academy Award for playing Helen Keller and Bancroft. Oh, God, what a wonderful actress.
Yeah.
So the two of them they'd done the play together, and now they'd done the picture together, and they both were honored with awards. And now she's going to do this thing. And, everybody was very excited about it, but Sidney Sheldon wrote it. Now, he had a very successful career as a writer of novels and all of that, and also long-form television. He didn't invent the concept, and he was stuck with it, I think. And Patty was fun to work with. She was very good. And coming-of-age teenagers who were going to high school and the shake shop and dancing and all of that. And we started in 1963, and the next year the Beatles arrived. And suddenly there was a whole change in the music culture. And so we had Chad and Jeremy came on the show at one point. And in a way, that also dated us because we weren't part of the rock and roll generation of the Beatle generation, but we were because she was young. And we had Frankie Avalon on the show too, though. So we had the old guard and we had the new guard, Chad and Jeremy. So we were on the cusp. It was a strange time. We had, I don't know what they call it, like a split screen, which meant that when she was playing Patty, she would have to stay on one side of the screen, and when she was playing Kathy, she'd have to stay on the other, unless her photo double was in the shot, in which case she had a little more flexibility. But if it's going to be her talking to herself, for instance, she would have to shoot the scene as Patty, and she would have to stay on one dividing line down the middle. They could do this better now with CGI, but then this is how they did it. Then they would strike that set, and she would change her makeup and her hair a little bit, whatever it was. And then she'd come back and do the same scene on the other side of the line, making sure never to cross that line. When they were finished, they would have two pieces of film, and they would cut away the bad stuff on the stuff that was not usable from one and keep the good stuff from the other. So then you put them together, and you'd have a whole picture where she was talking to herself. Now, they had to be timed so that they'd be the same length. And eventually they were wise enough to realize that they might as well use a playback of her reading in the first scene so that her capable but not particularly talented stand-in would not have to read them off screen, or the script supervisor. It was better if she was playing with a recording of herself. So they got to do that. They were rather slow in New York about it because they weren't used to doing this kind of stuff. It took us 5 days every week to shoot the show back there. The second year, it took us 4 days to shoot it. We came out to California and shot it in 3. So it kind of gives you an idea of what the difference was.
As I said, he was on a lot of other shows. He took over for Russ Martin when Russ Martin had a heart attack on Wild Wild West. He was hilarious as the Admiral in Get Smart, playing a 90-year-old. but one of his most famous roles was one nobody talked about, where he plays a bigoted teacher on Bonanza who tries to keep the real-life character Albert Michelson, who is Jewish, from going to the Naval Academy, and the real-life Albert Michelson goes on to win the Nobel Prize for discovering the speed of light. Eventually, Pa Cartwright Lauren Green shows William Schallert the error of his ways, and he recants.
Right, Mr. Norton? No thanks to you, Michelson. If you can't control your son, why don't you keep him off the streets? The boy is a public menace.
I'm sorry, sir.
Just what did you think you were doing, boy?
Trying to measure the speed of light?
The speed of light. Just listen to him. Albert Abraham Michelson, the boy genius of Virginia City. Just who do you think you are, boy? What makes you so all-fired arrogant? Games, that's what he's playing, games. And you thought he'd make a naval officer.
He still might, Norton. There's a presidential appointment all set up for him.
Oh, really? Well, I hope you don't come running to me for help.
Mr. Norton, my son made a mistake. A large mistake. Does this make him any less qualified to receive an education? Does a single mistake make him any less deserving?
Deserving? Your son? After what he's done?
Mr. Norton, you're judging that boy as if he were a grown man. He's only 16 years old. He can't help being immature.
I'm just a little tired of everybody making excuses for that boy.
Now, he deserves that appointment. Look at the marks he got.
Mr. Cartwright, I can't do what I don't believe in. Or would you have me compromise my beliefs just because you ask it? I don't quite know what to say. I've always believed all my life that the noblest thing a man could do was to teach. Take children and to help open their minds. What I didn't realize until just now was that first a teacher must make sure his own mind is open. I can't begin to make up for what I've done by a few words of apology or explanation. The only way that I could possibly make it up to those whom I've hurt is as a teacher. If you would give me another chance, I would do my best, work as hard as I could to be a real teacher to your children, to all your children.
William Schallert, great television actor. Well, I want to make a brief mention of Mark Lane, the leftist Brooklyn lawyer who died recently at the age of 89. He is the one who started the Kennedy conspiracy assassination craze. I'm not going to spend too much time with him because most of what he said was blatantly wrong, but I am going to quote Hugh Ainsworth, a reporter for the Dallas Morning News who was at the Kennedy assassination. Of Mark Lane, Ainsworth said, Lane found he could make almost any assertion about the assassination, even under oath, with impunity. He almost single-handedly invented the lucrative JFK conspiracy industry. His book Rush to Judgment was a mishmash of unproven and unlikely allegations and off-the-wall speculations. 15 publishing houses turned it down because they were too far behind Lane on the manufactured controversy learning curve. Only Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston guessed the true potential for profits in Rush. They issued the book as a $5.95 hardback in 1966 and sold 30,000 copies in just 2 weeks. It was a publishing home run, and it showed the way for legions of other buffs to get rich and famous. Mark Lane, no friend to history. I also want to make a brief mention of John Bradshaw, who died recently at the age of 82. He was a self-help evangelist who was always telling you to look for your inner child. He sold about 10 million books and had a popular PBS show called Bradshaw and Family, and even The Simpsons parodied him.
And now I'd like to introduce the man who will put the U in improvement. Brad Goodman.
Thank you so much, Troy. And by the way, I'm not happy you're still drinking. But at least you're down to 1 from more than 50. Folks, I'm often asked about my qualifications. Well, I may not have a lot of credentials or training, but I tell you one thing. I'm a PhD in pain. Now let me show you how you can change your life. Troy, this circle is you.
My God, it's like you've known me all my life.
I don't know if that stuff worked or not, but people loved it. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps, and we're going to close tonight with Ned Miller, who died recently at the age of 90. He was a country music singer and songwriter, and he wrote one of the country music classics. Covered by Ricky Van Shelton, it made it to #1 in the United States in 1989.
From a jack to a king, from loneliness to a wedding ring, I played an ace and I won a queen, and walked away with your heart.
Well, that's the cover, but to close, let's play the far better original by Ned Miller from 1962.
From a jack to a king, from loneliness to a wedding ring, I played an ace and I won a queen, and walked away with your heart. From a jack to a king, to make me king of your heart.